Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Welcome to our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. I'm Krista, and we are the Sixth Sense Society. Later tonight, we will have Kristen joining us by phone. But first, let's talk about the cosmic weather for this coming week. Tonight, actually, the moon is gibbous. It's a waxing gibbous in the sign of Cancer, which is my sun, Venus, and my Mercury. So I feel quite comfortable in this moon. And this week coming up on October 30th, we have an unusual event. We have Pluto conjunct the ecliptic, which hasn't happened in this way since 1930. It will be going north to south, and it will be at 5:13 p.m. Pacific time and 18 degrees of Capricorn. This is a very interesting event. I'm going to make a comment on it in just a minute, but I want to finish with the other astrology. We also have on October 31st, which, as you know, is Halloween, and part of our topic tonight, we're going to have Mercury moving into the sign of Sagittarius, which will give us a little break from all the Scorpio energy. And then we also have a great moon for Halloween. We have Leo, and it's going to be a quarter moon. So that should be a lot of fun for people in terms of performance, and it's a good party energy all around. But getting back to the Pluto conjunct the ecliptic, the last time, as I said, that one astrologer said this happened, it was in 1930 when there was the Great Depression, and also that's when Pluto itself was discovered by Clyde Tombaugh. So it doesn't have to be ominous, though, according to the same astrologer. Her name is Serena Childress, and she said that it's actually going to be quite comfortable in this position and sign, and it's a kind of a descent, though, into the underworld that will last, according to her, for 161 years. So I think it's something we'll probably come back to in terms of a commentary at some point. So Michael, is there any news that you'd like to share tonight?
Well, I think we've got some cool stuff going on. One of the most important things is last week we'd mentioned that our friend Dillinger, who usually has the haunted house in the haunted alley here in Venice, was a little under the weather. He was skateboarding, and apparently someone jumped out in front of him, and he tried to avoid her and took a dive and broke his hip. So there was talk that they weren't going to do it this year, and we were all saddened by that news. The good news, we've heard from his wife, Dawn, that it's back on again. So Dillinger's feeling better, and his recovery's going well, and the friends all pitched in and helped decorate. So Halloween night, we are going to be scaring the wits out of little kids and putting them into therapy for the next God knows how long. And it's really fun. It's on Rialto.
Yes.
And so if you guys are in Venice, it's just off Abbot Kinney, a couple blocks on Rialto. You won't have any trouble finding it. And Don and Dillinger are amazing people. They actually go to a lot of work. They get a permit from the city to close off the street. They decorate to the nines. They created this whole haunted alley in between their home and the one next to it. All the neighbors kind of help out by dressing up in scary costumes and scaring the wits out of people as they go through. So it's just a heck of a lot of fun. And please drop by if you're in the Venice area. Of course, this is Halloween coming up this Wednesday, or Samhain, as they call it in the pagan tradition. I know yesterday was the Day of the Dead, so I'm hoping that some of you got the chance to go to Hollywood Forever Cemetery and enjoy that. And if you didn't, next year, it's a must. It's just an amazing, amazing time. And of course, sorry, losing my voice a little bit. And then, of course, on Halloween night, to remind everyone, they have the Halloween Carnival on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. They close off the boulevard between La Cienega and Doheny. And it's just insane. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in various levels of intoxication, just having a really good time. And so it's a pretty amazing event. And if you can take that in, that's always a good idea, too. Lots of other Halloween stuff going on. I know our friend David Ullman is having a Halloween party at his house, and I'm sure you can find information about that somewhere online. And hopefully we'll have David on as a guest somewhere in the future. He is this haunted host that's been on every ghost-busting show in creation, and he's quite an interesting character. So I'm hoping that we'll get him as a guest somewhere down the road. So I think that those are the main things that are going on that I'm aware of right now. And we hope you guys all have a safe and fun Halloween and just enjoy
However
the
way
heck
you
out of it.
celebrate it, yes.
Halloween celebrated to the nines, and that's what we're going to do. So back over to you, Krista.
Yeah, and Rialto is really cool because they closed the whole street off, and there's a lot of other houses that still decorate some incredible things there. And it's not maybe as much as it was like, say, 10 years ago, but there's definitely a celebratory feeling. It's very Venice. And I think last year, I don't know, it was like thousands of people went through the alley. I couldn't believe how many people went. So it is a lot of fun, even though it's kind of a tradition that grew out of our own tradition. Michael and I, we used to celebrate kind of a combination of Halloween and honoring our ancestors, which was actually quite popular with people. And we do it at our apartment, which is not very big, but Michael would decorate the porch, often politically, in a Halloween theme, especially when Obama was running. I remember that, and that was great. So we would do part Halloween and part honoring the ancestors. So part of the honoring of the ancestor ritual we would light a candle, and everybody would go around and take turns. Whoever wanted to join us, even people we didn't know would come sometimes, and basically talk about people that had died in their life they wanted to honor that year. And then as part of the ritual, we would do a wish for the year ahead. And then you would take your own candle. We usually used white candles. And we would take it, and you could take it home and burn it down. Though oftentimes people would forget their candles. One year I remember I felt super responsible, like I should probably burn them all down. And I just said, that's just not going to happen. So I think it's fine that the intention was there. It was a very touching time, actually. And we had a couple friends that always would come because of that very simple ritual. It was very simple, not elaborate. And then we'd have like a Halloween themed party. So people would certainly come in costumes. And that's what we did for quite a few years until I think we needed to take a little bit of a break, and then we were invited over sort of to Dillinger's, and I think Michael was the first one to participate as a monster in the alley, and he came back so excited about how much fun it was, so he kind of dragged me in at first. I thought, well, I'm not going to be a good monster.
We definitely always have a good time for Halloween, but there is definitely a sacred aspect to it as well, and I think we used to do this amazing little ritual, and it was basically simple. And one of the things I find often about ritual is some people like really complicated, complex rituals, but sometimes the simple ones are the easiest to connect with because you don't have to be wondering about whether you're standing in the right place or you're holding the right gesture. So our ritual, and I suggested, give it a shot if you guys have a gathering. And what we used to do is to create a circle. We'd put a cauldron in the center with a lit candle. And we'd hand out candles to everybody in the circle. So the first person would light their candle from the one in the altar or in the cauldron. And then they would speak about people that had passed over, that were close to them and that they wanted to remember and memorialize. And then after they would finish, the next person would light their candle off the first person's candle and do the same. And it would go all the way around the circle until all the candles were lit. Once it had gone all the way around the circle until the candles were all lit, then the first person again would make their wish for the new year. They'd summarize the year and make their intention, because Samhain, again, in the pagan tradition, is sort of the New Year's Eve, so it's that New Year's resolution kind of thing. And I remember the first year we did this. It was the first year here in Los Angeles, and we'd moved from Nova Scotia, and it was culture shock. I was having a hard time adjusting to the idea of being in California and in Los Angeles in particular. So I kind of struggled with it the first year, and we did our Samhain ritual, and I said, this past year I finally think I've made peace with the idea of being in LA. This year I'm going to see if I can find a reason to like it. And it became the most magical year. We had all these cool things happen. We got invited to Nicolas Cage's place up in Brentwood, in this big mansion for his birthday party with all these people and all these magical events that occurred. And it was really, really fantastic. And so I think that it works sometimes. I think establishing that intention, as always with intention, be careful what you wish for, because Krista made a big mistake one year. And
yeah.
She said, this year I'm going to learn to be more patient. And you know how how you develop patience is basically everything is a struggle. You had to wait for everything to happen because it was teaching her to be patient. So as I said, always be very careful what you wish for. And then after the person would make their intent, they would just blow out the candle. And again, that would go all the way around until the candles were extinguished. So a very simple ritual, but very moving, very powerful. We even had people that had been to our ritual one year with friends call in from Australia one year to try and be a part of it by phone. And it really was heartfelt to everyone. So I highly recommend that if you guys want to steal our idea. And maybe Krista can elaborate more on that as well.
Well, I think that it shows that we we need places to talk about the people we've lost as long as we want to. And I'm one of these people, Michael is too. We both lost at an early age. We had death at an early age. And so death has been a big part of my life. And in order to make peace with death, I feel these rituals are very helpful. I also find that I personally believe in contacting the dead. I've had enough experiences that I just can't discount. I don't know how it works. I've also heard a lot. So I think having a space where you can talk about who you want to, what they meant to you, in a way you're honoring them, is also, and having people witness it is very soothing and therapeutic and magical, and also I think it binds people together, because I really looked forward to seeing some of the same people or new people, and even people that really they knew we practiced sort of non-traditional religion, but they didn't necessarily. So this is something I think that really appeals to everyone, no matter your tradition. And I think that's one reason why Day of the Dead in Los Angeles at the Hollywood Forever is so popular, because sure, it's based on an amazing Mexican tradition that's gone back thousands of years. It's just wonderful that you can go to a place where they're celebrating and honoring the ancestors in such a beautiful, artistic way. And even if you're not familiar with the culture, Michael and I feel very strongly about everyone should at least go once, because it's magnificent. And I think it teaches you a different experience of death, and one that I think is very important to our culture, the idea we can celebrate and not only mourn people. And in my case, I feel like during this time, and also Beltane, the veils are thin, so you can have some contact with the dead on your own. Your own relatives can talk to you or reach you through visions, through dreams and synchronicities and things like that. So the theme tonight is really, we're going to be talking about, some of the rituals associated with honoring our ancestors that we are aware of, though I'm sure there's many, many more. And as you can see, some of our own experiences with it. One of the experiences I have is when in my 20s, I was really immersed in Tibetan Buddhism. And that's one of the places I really learned to appreciate death as an opportunity. In this case, you're trained to see death as a moment in which, if you can recognize what's happening, you can become enlightened. So that there are different moments in Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism where it's easier to do that. So when my grandmother was ill and dying, I was trained a little differently on how to handle the moment of her death. And one of the things I was taught was, when she died, at the moment of her death, not to grieve right away, but to postpone that, but to really send her a lot of light and joy, so that she herself would have an ability to transform at the moment of her death. So you really had to get out of yourself and think about the well-being of the person that had died. And in her case, in some ways, I think she did feel more joyful, because she had a difficult experience towards the end with her body. She had died of cancer, and the last month was extremely painful for her, I could tell, and it was painful for me to watch. So in some way it was easier, because you knew that she was out of that physical pain too. But I didn't tell anyone because I thought they'd think I was mean or crazy. And I do remember feeling this kind of light or joy for her, and I hoped it really helped her wherever her journey took her. And what's interesting, she had a lawyer that was unusually kind, and she would come and bring her flowers from her garden, and she'd visit her when she didn't need to. And she said afterwards she really felt this kind of joy when my grandmother left her body. So, of course, you can grieve later, and there's plenty of time for that, and there's nothing wrong with grieving. So this is just to help the person leaving their physical body. And that was what I was trained, through the Tibetan Buddhist lamas to try and do anyway. I did my best. So I had a different, view of death as I went through with Tibetan Buddhism, because of the way they also accept death, and they see it as an opportunity. And I have another story which I'll share a little later on. But getting back to, the ritual of honoring our ancestors, and why do we think that's important? And what if we have ancestors we don't like or we don't know? I would say that before I got involved in more of the pagan traditions, I think I did take some of my ancestry for granted. And I wasn't really raised knowing a lot about the history of my family like some people are, which I feel a little sad about now, though, of course, there's many ways you can look up your own family tree and ancestry. And there's, as you see, there's also a big growth in people wanting to know through their DNA their exact lineages. So I think it's a growing thing again. And I think one of the reasons it can be quite helpful is it gives you a sense of rootedness, of where, you know, you're coming from, whether it's good or bad in terms of your ancestors. Because I think we probably all have some dark characters in there, or some noble people in our ancestry too. And in celebrating, I think in paganism, I remember reading in Silver Ravenwolf's book that she really thinks it's a good idea when you start to practice any kind of paganism to honor your lineage, such as, let's say, you're Nordic, you know, and to pick deities from that initially. And when I first read that, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. But over the years, I really agree with her. Because again, you're going to have a natural kind of kinship with them, and it's going to help you feel that connection to your own heritage. Certainly you can expand, and some people feel connected to deities they have no connection to, and that's perfectly fine. You know, it's not a good or bad thing. But I feel like for me, what I have is sort of a ancestral shrine that honors my Irish traditional ancestral heritage and things like that.
Well, we are in luck. We have Kristen joining us by phone. So
Awesome.
she should be able to hear us, hopefully. And this is new technology for us, but we hope it's all working properly. Hi, Kristen.
Hey guys, how you doing over there?
Hey, good to hear you.
I can barely hear Krista, but I can hear Michael loud and clear, but I can barely hear Krista.
All right.
So
Well, we'll try and get that better for you. So how's that? Is that a little bit better?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you very muted.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll have to put up with it because I'm not quite sure exactly how we're going to fix that. But anyway.
Well, there's also a test on all of this and everything as well. So it's super exciting, and let's keep the conversation going. And I will do my best to understand what Krista is saying.
Oh yeah.
What have y'all been talking about so far?
And we've been talking about ancestry and how different people view all of that, which is really great, and why that's important. Some of the rituals we've done around Samhain or Halloween. So that's been a lot of what we've been discussing. And do you have any particular rituals that you like to do for this season?
I'm a big candle person, and I always like to dress candles specifically for, whatever holiday or event or situation that I'm kind of dealing with. So for Halloween, I love to get one of those beautiful black moon candles, and I'll dress it with rosemary, thyme, and sort of like the medieval, what I call the medieval herbs, like the ones that have been around that people have been using forever, that are very protective and sort of like things that protect you as you walk through the veil as it thins, so to speak. Since we know that the veil gets very, very thin on Samhain.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to be protected as you're receiving, this information, and also seeing signs and things that you don't normally see, given how thin the veil is. So yeah, absolutely, that's something that I like to do.
That's wonderful. Have you ever gone to the Day of the Dead at Hollywood Forever?
I think what you're asking me is if I've been to Hollywood Forever, and
Yeah.
no, I haven't. And it's so funny because somebody I know is actually going tonight, and I can't go because I've got another thing I have to go to. But it's supposed to be really super fun.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I'm sure as an actress you would appreciate all the performances actually, and the costuming, and the incredible amount of work people put into the altars. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is a fantastic, just amazing event. So if you do get the chance to go some year, I think that's a good thing. One of the things we were talking about is ritual too, and there's so many different traditions that have rituals around the dead, and I think that it's such an important part of connecting us to who we are. And ancestry seems to be one of those really big deals in terms of I don't know why that's so important. It is. I know in my own life, my mother's side of the family were Scottish, and the last couple of years especially, I've taken to wearing kilts all the time, and for some reason, I just feel so much more connected to my lineage, and to my heritage, and to who I am, and so I think that there's an important aspect of that when it comes to any kind of honoring of ancestry.
Well, and I think it's also important as far as breaking ancestral patterns, if we want to go in that direction as well, because we have in our DNA, patterns from our ancestors that go way back, and sometimes things kind of get stuck within us that can result in certain behavior patterns, albeit negative or positive or neutral. And I think when you can honor the ancestors and kind of on this particular day, it's also a great time to do some what you might call shadow work, or just dealing with and clearing out ancestral patterns that are things that are ready to be released, while honoring the ancestors and honoring that which where you came from in a positive way, if it makes sense.
That's a great point, and I totally agree with that. I remember reading an article in Science. They have proven that you do inherit unprocessed wounds from your ancestors. So let's say my ancestry, which is true, they survived some of the Holocaust and some of them did not. That terror and that fear was passed on through me into my DNA. So it helps to understand, and you could also say, well, maybe it's past life, which it could be either. But I do remember it was actually more of a scientific view, and it's important to know that. So if you feel you do have a phobia, that maybe it's come through your lineage, and that way you can identify it in order to do the shadow work. But that's a great point.
There's another interesting thing with ancestry. If you've been, you still have time until February, but they have the King Tut exhibit at the Science Center by USC. Highly recommended. An amazing performance or exhibit. And one of the cool things about that was the idea that, first of all, it's like going through the underworld, the way they've presented it with the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But one of the things about the pharaohs was that, and in Egypt you die twice. And they were saying one of the times you die, the first time is your physical death when you pass. But the more important death is when people no longer speak your name. So there's something, again, about ancestral ritual where it's a sort of remembering and keeping it alive. And in some way, we're keeping those people's spirit alive in some sense by not forgetting them. And we see, so many rituals of remembrance, whether it's around, wars and Memorial Days kind of events or other forms of ritual. But I think it's just so important for some reason psychologically that we have that ability to maintain that connection.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts, Krista?
Well, I think they're really, really great points. And I guess that also is why it's great to do memorial walls for people that have been lost. And I had read that elsewhere, but I cannot remember about if you say a person's name, it basically will keep them alive. And, I forget what tradition too. So I'd forgotten about the Egyptian thing we went to recently, King Tut. That was really amazing. I think that it's also a preparation for me because it is my new year, which I really embrace fully now. I always forget when the January 1st comes along that's most people's new year in the West, and I've already celebrated my new year. It's preparing me for that sort of going down deep, like Kristen was saying, because it's in the Northern Hemisphere, it's the darker time in which you can do more healing. You can maybe be less social, which is awkward because of all the holidays. But when I have honored that, I feel better when I follow the season. So one of the things I like about the pagan traditions are it's rooted in nature. And when we are more in harmony with nature, we can feel better about ourselves. So for instance, for me, because I'd lost my brother at such an early age, I was mourning him like too much. And I began to feel like I'm in the underworld too much. And so I told myself, well, I will honor him during the time that it's natural to honor somebody. And then the other times, like the summer, I'm going to celebrate life and move forward. And it really helped me because I knew I wouldn't be able to not honor him. He was so important to me. But now I know I have this rhythm I have. And certainly you're going to have breaks from a rhythm, but it feels good. It feels very wholesome. And so that's one of the things that having these markers like, Samhain and Beltane, it helps me to be a more holistic person, I feel, and try to work with the natural forces instead of conquer them or control them, which I think is crazy. You can't conquer Mother Nature. So those are some of my thoughts.
So, Kristen, I know you're not here with us today, so what are you up to?
Well, actually, I was just tutoring I have a master's degree in special ed as well, and I do private tutoring for kids, and so that's where I just came from. And I'm going to be on my way to see another little kiddo in a little bit. After that, I'm actually going to film. If you happen to, if you're watching live, listening to us live, if you want to hit the Gray Studios later this evening around 6:30, there's going to be a film festival going on, and there's just some new independent shorts and things, and I'm actually going to be reading tarot at the event. So that's
pretty cool.
I'm looking forward to that.
That's always a fun time to do readings around this time of year, too. People kind of go crazy for it. And so I know we've done a lot of readings lately, and it seems like Halloween that people just absolutely love to get readings. So it's been a busy week.
It brings it out in people.
Yes.
It's a time to get readings because, again, the veil is thin.
Yeah, for sure.
If you're that type of... So, yes, I'm actually excited to do it. That's why she asked me to do it. She thought it would be a fun thing to have for the filmmakers and for the audience members while they're sort of like a mixer that they do ahead of time, and with drinks and so that people can network and mingle. And she thought it would be fun to have a tarot card reader there as part of the event. So people, especially if people are drunk, I think that would be they might be more open to listening to the reading.
The best part about doing readings for people that are really drunk is if you screw up the reading the next morning, they're not going to remember anyway. So it kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. But no, it's we've done a lot of parties over the years, and there's absolutely no doubt that it can be an awful lot of fun. But it really depends on the event, and we've done events where they were nice enough to sit us right next to a rock band, and that's not easy to do a reading when you're trying to compete with a rock band. So hopefully you'll have a quiet area tonight where you don't have to deal with drums and electric guitars and screaming people. So
I think it will be. I think that the filmmaker lounge and all that stuff, that's going to be pretty quiet, thank goodness. So, and I know that artistic people tend to be a little bit more open to this stuff. So I'm sure depending on what kind of event you're doing, you get a lot of people that are sort of like skeptics and non-believers, and they sort of like, so I'm not going to say anything, and you just tell me my entire life.
Oh, yeah.
You better not get it wrong, even though I'm not asking you any question or giving you anything or saying anything. As opposed to, I think, artists are, in general, like I tend to see when I do events with a lot of artistic people, they just want the readings and they're very open to it. And even if they don't 100% believe it, they're just more open to it, which I think is a good thing. You get a better reading.
It's funny, we're talking a lot about death, and not to be morbid, but it is, Samhain rituals about remembrance and people who have passed and so forth. But there is another element in many, many cultures where, as we were saying, it is sort of a time where prophecy is a big deal. And there are a number of different methods of prophecy that actually employ the idea of someone who has passed and trying to get in touch with the afterlife and the people that are now in spirit world to help us understand and guide us and so forth. So that there is a fascinating connection sometimes between prophecy and this time of year for sure.
Well, is it necromancy where you receive divination oracles through actually a dead person? Isn't that an old form of divination? I forget that. I think that's what it's called, but I could be wrong. Going back to the whole celebration of the ancestors, one of the even though this is one of the best times to do it, you can set up altars to ancestors, and it's not uncommon in a lot of traditions. So I've read in the Italian witchcraft books, they have an ancestral altar with some specific herbs. I think rue is one, and salt. And in doing that, you can protect your home. And then I remember reading, I believe it was in Thich Nhat Hanh's book, No Death, No Fear, about putting one's ancestors' images on your altar. And they also have a daily, the Vietnamese have a daily altar to their family. He made a point, however, to say to include even the ancestors you don't like. So I thought that was fun, because of course you're going to want to remember the people, you felt the most close to. And he said one of the reasons is that it helps you to feel rooted in the world, and it gives you an anchor. And I think there is some truth to that. It doesn't mean you're going to be your ancestors, or you have to, if we have, like Kristen said, shadow work that comes through our ancestors, we want to change the patterns. But it does, I think it's a good way of humbling us all to show that we come from a diverse background in a sense. And as I've gotten older, I have to admit, I like the ancestry idea even more so than when I was younger and more rebellious and just wanted to be me no matter what my family lineage is. And my dad also went through a period where he really did a lot of work on the family tree, and he sent me the disc of it. I still have to look through all of it, and so I really appreciate that he did that, at least on his side. I'm not really sure about my mother's side. So those are the other thing I wanted to say too is that you can do like a devotion to your ancestors on a daily basis, which I did in the beginning when I was first learning witchcraft. I really liked some of Silver Ravenwolf's suggestions, and so she has a really simple, beautiful ancestral devotion that you can find in one of her books, To Stir a Magic Cauldron. And she uses a cauldron, a candle, and ice, and there's a very simple prayer. You can either call in the lady your lord, or you can pick a goddess and god that you want to work with. And when I did that devotion several times, I really felt a deep ritualistic experience happening quite easily. And I wrote it down. I'd even forgotten some of the things that came through, but luckily I keep a magical journal like many people do in magic. So I can recommend that. That way you can kind of keep in touch with your ancestors if you want on a regular basis. And I've even read accounts in ghost books where a dead relative has actually helped someone. Michael has, I think, a story about that, where they can even come and help you at times, certain ancestors, and solve problems so that you have this protection from them. And of course you have to give them something too, and there's different ways you can honor them. For instance, I know in the Samhain tradition, when you set up an altar, you put out their favorite foods. So whatever they are, even if they smoke cigarettes, you put the pack of cigarettes and their favorite coffee, and to honor them, and even though they don't technically eat anymore. So that's one way to kind of feed the spirits.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that seems to be a big part of things. At the Day of the Dead, you'll see that they put out a lot of the person's favorite liquor and foods and so forth, and it is inviting them sort of back in. And as in the pagan world, again, the idea that the veils are thin and that people from the other side can visit easier and connect with us easier at this time of year, and so forth, is the belief. I'm not sure why that is, but it is. Although, interestingly, if you look at statistics, one of the things that's very interesting is that the greatest number of hauntings are reported around the equinox, spring and summer equinox. And it's supposed to be an in-between time. So that's the time where the light and dark are balanced. It's an equal number of hours, day and night, is around the equinox. And I suppose that's why midnight again, it's neither of this day nor the next. And so again, and of course with Samhain in the old agricultural calendar, end of October was the in-between time again. It was the end of the old year, the beginning of the new, and those in-between times were kind of magical and special. Funny story about that, back in my youth, I've had many lives in this lifetime. I feel like Doctor Who. But one of them was being a radioman in the Canadian Navy, if you can imagine that.
Cool.
And one of the things we weren't allowed to do was to use midnight, because in military time, if you put 0000, they didn't know if you were talking about midnight this one or midnight the last one, because it would be the same time. So you always had to use 2359 or 0001, but you couldn't use 0000 because it would cause confusion. So I thought that was interesting, and it's kind of an in-between time again. So this is considered one of those in-between times, and that is why it's sometimes considered so magical in that respect. So that's my story of life at sea. What can I say?
Well, we did have...
That's pretty awesome.
Speaking of contacts with spirits, we had an unusual thing happen last year when we went to the Hollywood Day of the Dead. We hadn't been for a little while, and it was daytime, and Michael decided to take a shortcut when we were leaving, and he just picked it randomly. So we're walking along, and we come right up to a plaque that had one of our dear neighbors' names on it, Andrew, who had died, I forget what year it was, but we had lost through suicide, actually. And I'd felt very close to him, and Michael had, and there his name was and everything, and we had no idea that was there. And I was so humbled and so amazed that had happened. I really felt that he had contacted us, and it was one of those synchronicities you just can't, you can't get your mind around. I've had so many around all kinds of things, but that one really was remarkable considering the time of the year and how special he was to us. And so I still remember that. It was pretty powerful.
So here's an idea. Since we're getting into our ancestors, we should remember ours. And the ones that are important to me, obviously, my mom and dad, that were pretty amazing. And when I was born, I don't know if people know this, but some people do, I suppose, friends, but my mom was actually 50 years old when I was born, so I came along late in life. And they say that children born late in life are either geniuses or not too bright, so you have to, you guys can debate which one it is in my case. Sometimes a little of both, I suppose. But they were pretty amazing people, and of course my mother's was the Scottish side of the family, so all the Braveheart stuff and fighting with Wallace and the Black Douglas and all that, very romanticized kind of Scottish culture on her side. Dad was German, and Dad was an old fisherman, so he went to sea in 1928 at the age of 14. Couldn't get along with his school teacher, so he quit school and he went fishing and made his living on a tall ship. He would fish off the Grand Banks and then take fish and freight to the West Indies and the Bahamas, and then freight back to Nova Scotia from there. So I grew up with all of his stories of life at sea, and it was just amazing people, the both of them. And unfortunately, they passed away when I was very young. I was 21, I think. And it was an interesting time. My mother passed first of a heart attack. And Dad had several. He was a stubborn old guy, and the last time he'd had a major one, the doctor said there's nothing we can do for him. Make preparations because he won't survive. If he does, he'd be an invalid. And he would have a heart attack. He would actually climb out of the hospital bed and stand up and hold onto the rail. And his hands were so strong, you couldn't break his grip. And he had no idea even where he was. And the nurses would say, what are we going to do with him? I said, I guess we're going to leave him. And when he's tired, he'll get back in bed. And sure enough, about 10, 15 minutes later, he'd crawl back over the rail. And an hour later, he'd be standing up again. And so he just wouldn't fall down. And so then 3 weeks later, he was splitting wood with an axe in back of the house. And the doctor had no explanation. And then a couple years later, Mom passed away, and he stayed. I visited him for 10 days. He went to the South Shore of Nova Scotia, visited his relatives, went home that Sunday, laid down, in 30 minutes he passed away. But so it was 3 weeks later, roughly. But it was funny. We have, and you always find dark humor even in things like this. And Mom passed first, and then her brother died of a stroke 3 days after my mom, and then Dad 3 weeks later. So the minister in our little town of 1,800 people was away on sabbatical, and there was an old retired guy filling in for him. So Mom's sermon was beautiful. It was very poetic, and it was just perfect, and everything. He'd worked his whole life on this sermon. So, of course, 3 days later, the family's back for her brother's funeral. We can't really say the same thing. It was just 3 days ago. So he had to switch it up a little bit and improvise a little bit. And it was still nice, but it was not quite as smooth and not quite as polished. And, of course, 3 weeks later, everybody was back for Dad's funeral. And And at that point, I think he felt God was playing a cosmic joke on him or something. It was really funny to watch him being humbled, after all these years. And just when he thought this was going to get easy, But the other thing I remember about my parents passing, which was really cool, is they actually ran a little jail in Nova Scotia. So I grew up in jail, literally. So, that accounts for a lot, too.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was really funny. The RCMP used to show up and drag drunks through my front door every night. but anyway, every small town has a town drunk, and very Mayberry, and ours was a guy named Jeff Boudreau, and he loved my mother's cooking, so he would always manage to get drunk and get thrown in jail just in time for supper. so it was his routine, and he was there just about every day or every other day. And they just let him sober up and then kick him out, nothing ever came of it. But my dad, I didn't realize how respected he was. He'd been a volunteer fireman, and when he passed, my brother-in-law actually called the RCMP, and they said, would you be pallbearers for him? And the guy that answered the phone said, well, he's not really a member of the force, and we don't really do that. So the guy that was in command of the detachment overheard the conversation. He asked what was going on, and the guy told him, he said, I worked with many years with that man. He said, ask him if they want us to wear the red serge. And we said they didn't have to go quite that far, but 6 Mounties were my dad's pallbearers, which is really cool. But I didn't realize how many people knew him. And at his funeral, the church was literally packed from beginning to end, every seat.
Wow.
And sitting in the front row, sober with a tie on, was Jeff Boudreau. He showed up to pay his respects to my dad, because Dad always treated everybody fair, no matter who they were. And he just really, everybody respected him. And even the town drunk showed up to pay his respects. And I thought that was pretty cool. So, and those are the kind of things that I think ancestry is important. It gives us a sense of who we are, too, from these people. So those are the two that I remember the most fondly. So maybe, Kristen, what would be your people that you're in remembrance of?
It was coming to mind, and I was thinking about our show and what we talk about. My grandparents, all 4 of them, on my mother's side and my father's side. My grandfather, on my father's side, I never really met because he died when I was 1 years old. And as the story goes, I used to, when he was sort of sick in bed, and at the end, I would kind of walk around the bed, and I would hang on to the bed, and I would walk, and without assistance. And he would say, like, oh, at least I got to see her walk. But all 4 of my grandparents have passed. And my other grandfather on my mother's side was a very Catholic sort of dude. He was a hard worker. He was, he was born here in the U.S., but from like an Irish background. Parents were from Ireland, and sort of just like hard-working background, worked 7 days a week his whole life, and he was a very Catholic, very oriented, very good person, hard worker. And he never in his living years would he ever have done anything psychic. Nothing. Absolutely nothing psychic. And interestingly enough, I was at a medium gallery, and he came in to talk to me. And the way it was described, the woman was describing this guy. I'm like, gosh, it sounds like my grandfather. And then she was like, this particular person would never be at a medium gallery like this. So, and it's interesting because ever since that medium gallery, my grandfather, I called him Granddaddy, Granddaddy has come to visit me often in channeling and meditation. And it's just so interesting because the things that he says are just so incredibly funny and insightful. And it's just things that that kind of when you're channeling, when you hear words or phrases come to you that you would never use.
Right.
And something that I want to share just really quickly is in meditation once, right after that medium gallery, I was doing a breathwork meditation, and he came in very strong during the meditation. And he was saying, you can't be afraid to rat-tat-tat with a man that's your partner, because you have to be able to. And I thought, rat-tat-tat, what is he trying to say? I never would use that word. He was just trying to tell me, don't be afraid to be yourself in romantic partnership. And he was saying, your grandmother and I, we rat-tat-tatted all the time, and I loved her very much. And look at your parents. And I just thought that was so beautiful, because he's come up in actually several medium-type situations since then, where he's just saying, he wants you to know I'm there for you. And again, this is the kind of guy that went to church every Sunday, would not eat meat every Friday, went to confession. I mean, all this stuff. And here he is kind of appearing from the other side now that he's dead. He's into the psychic. So I kind of wanted to share that little story and just honor all four of my grandparents who have passed on, that I love very much. So
Those are great stories, both of you. I have so many now, so I'll stick to maybe a few of them. Obviously, my mother, who also wasn't really into the psychic world, but actually was very psychic and saw spirits. She was raised a Catholic, and she died in 2005 unexpectedly. So my mother was one of these people that was the kindest person you could meet. She really believed in practicing kindness, and even though she was raised Catholic, she was not really religious per se, though she did once say she was really sad when the Mass was not said in Latin anymore, even though she didn't go. She was very scientific in a lot of ways, and she loved mysteries. She read every mystery book you can possibly imagine. In fact, my mother was super smart. And every now and then I'd read a book and say, she hasn't read this, so I'm going to get her, And she goes, oh, yes, I remember that. And then she would remember things from the book. Like I'd be, okay, how does she do that? But she also secretly had this stash of pulp mystery books. So when she died, we were going through her things, and there was like 800 of these pulp mystery books, sort of like as if they were naughty or something she didn't want anyone to know about. I love that about her. And she also made incredible pies. Michael's mother and I and my mother shared the same ability to cook. They both cooked really well, but my mother was also extremely smart, so I think I get a lot of her love of reading and certainly some of her smarts from her. And then, of course, my brother David, who was lost at sea at the age of 18 off of Baja, doing something he loved. He was kayaking. There was a lot of trauma around his death. One reason was they never recovered his body, and they did recover the bodies of two of the other young people. And he was also extremely advanced in a lot of ways, a really funny person. He was so supportive of everybody in the family. He was, for instance, the only member of my family when I was on the swim team. He would come out, and he was a champion cross-country runner. And he would cheer like you would not believe it. He'd be just yelling, come on, Chris, come on, Chris. I'll never forget that. I still can remember how much he really wanted people to succeed. He was brilliant. He got a Latin scholarship to Duke. He skipped a year in high school. But I also remember laughing a lot with him and my mother. We used to just laugh hysterically about things. So very, very special soul in a lot of ways. And he was into Edgar Cayce and was already working on himself as a young person, and also an incredible writer. From the age of 12, he was writing, and he had some children's novels sort of penned out in his journals, which my father published his journals, which are pretty amazing, actually. So those two people I will remember today, and the others I will remember on Halloween themselves, because I said at this point, as you get older, it's important to find ways to really embrace and honor loss, because that will make your life richer. And I remember reading that in a study that people that lived very long lives and were happy, they have learned to cope with loss. And I think these rituals really help you cope with loss. And I also personally, as I said earlier, believe that we can contact the dead ourselves, which will be part of our show next week. We're going to have a wonderful medium on, Adela Levine, and she's going to come on and talk to us about mediumship and her own particular purpose as a medium, what she wants to do to help educate people around mediumship and help you to connect on your own and not simply go to mediums, which I really like that about her and her philosophy. And there'll be a lot more, so we're very excited. She's going to be coming on next Sunday. We're looking forward to that. So those are the people I would like to remember. Is there anything else either of you want to add about this topic, about ancestors in general, anything at all?
Not that I can think of a whole lot, other than I think that it's just really wonderful. I think it's sad that people sometimes, I think, fear death or think of it as morbid. I think it's a natural transition. I think and of course the Buddhists make a big argument for reincarnation, and so I'm fairly convinced that this is, I know without a doubt that there's life beyond this, no doubt. And the story that I always remember, and Krista will remember, was a woman I was friends with back in Nova Scotia. Her name was Bev. She worked at a little convenience store, and got a little rough around the edges and a bit of a practical joker and a real character. So we became very fond of her and her of us. And I'd known her for many, many years. And then one year after I'd met Krista, she knew we had no family in the city, and it was coming up on Christmas, so she invited us to her place for Christmas dinner. And so we went. And I walked through the door, and there's pictures of this teenage boy everywhere and candles. It turns out she'd had one son who was a teenager, died in a car accident. And after she knew that she'd never mentioned it, so I didn't know anything about it. So I was, taken back. And then a little time went past, and I was standing at the store with her one night, and she told me the story, and she said, and it was after she knew I was into tarot cards and all kinds of weird things, and I don't think she thought I would judge her or make fun of her. I think she felt safe. And she said that I was here at the store one night, and this car pulled up, and this guy got out with a long coat on it, and he walked up to the door, and he reached for the door handle, and he froze. And she said, standing inside the door as plain as day was my son and my father, and they looked at him, and he looked at them, and he got back into the car, said something to the guy driving, and they drove off. He never came in the store, and my son waved at me, and they vanished in front of my eyes. And she said about an hour later, the cops came in looking for the guy. He had a shotgun under his coat. He beat up and robbed the clerk up the street instead of her. And I thought, they'd showed up and intervened. And she started crying when she told me the story. So if ever there was a doubt in my mind that there was an afterlife, and the thing about Bev and what makes her so credible is that was her sacred thing. And you never joke about your sacred thing. Mm-hmm. And that was her sacred thing. So I totally believe her. And then I've had my own experiences too. So I think it's nothing to be feared. And I think that the idea that we can celebrate this transition and not see it as dark or morbid or scary, I think is very, very important. And I think some of these rituals try and help us not to be scared of when our time comes, that it is going to be a natural thing. And I think the Buddhists actually even refer to it as a non-event. They think it's not even going to be a big deal. You just kind of wake up in your next incarnation, just like waking up in the morning. And they say it's almost the same experience as going to sleep and waking up in the next day. And so it's not a big big drama or a big scary thing at all, And and as I said, I've seen so many things that convince me that life doesn't end when the body ends. The body is just a capsule, and there's something about the essence that does live on. And so I think that these rituals are part of helping us to remember that,
Yeah, and I did want to bring up, there was one event I went to that also affected my view of death, and it was the cremation of Trungpa Rinpoche, which happened, sometime in the 80s. He was a very important Tibetan Buddhist teacher that really westernized a lot of Tibetan Buddhism. And I really didn't even have the means to go, but my friend insisted I go to this event. So he loaned me some money, and I went to Vermont. There was thousands of people, and they had all of the top lamas there's one room. They had his body, and I don't know if it'd been cremated. You couldn't see the body, but it was encased, and you could circumambulate the body. And as you were doing that, you had all these amazing Buddhist teachers. They were praying and using all the instruments. And one of the things Tibetan Buddhists are so good at is raising the energy of a room. It was so beautiful and celebratory. And also, we all saw the signs in the sky. When masters die, I saw a rainbow around the sun. We saw these little they look like little brushes of rainbows, and there was no cloud in the sky. They took pictures of it. So I was not on any drugs. So it was really quite an experience to see a culture that, as Michael said, they see death differently than we do. And I think Westerners are, certainly there's certain traditions like the Irish with their wakes and that have that same celebratory energy and honoring the life of somebody and not to be afraid so much of death. And certainly many of us don't want to suffer as we die. Though I even heard stories about sometimes people not actually suffering, even though they look like it, they leave their bodies. And that made me feel a little better too, for certain accidents and things like that. So I think that, I think we're moving along as a culture and looking at death differently and being with the dying and not leaving them. I think that's changing a lot personally, even in the Western civilization. So as we get closer to the end of our show, I think that's pretty much all I can think of to talk about ancestors and the different traditions. And I hope that all of you are able to enjoy next week in whatever capacity you like to enjoy. I know some people are a little afraid of Halloween, and there is that whole movie contingency, talking about last week's horror movies and some of the Halloween movies. But I think that's kind of sad. And in fact, I've even heard people say they're afraid of the sort of Day of the Dead depictions because they're skeletons. And I thought, well, we're all skeletons, so you're basically saying you're afraid of yourself in that way. So I think it's good to find ways to not fear death, however way you want to approach it, and to remember your ancestry, which again is, I think, on the rise if you look at all the DNA testing sites and people wanting to know about their ancestors. So I think that's kind of cool. And there's a lot easier ways to contact people. If you do find that you have an ancestor in another country, now you can actually contact them. I've had someone contact me actually through the DNA part where they match you up, and they wanted to know if I was related to so-and-so in my family, but I couldn't answer, unfortunately. But it was neat that she reached out to contact me, so I really liked that.
So, Kristen, I guess we're getting close to the top of the hour. Any final thoughts from you before we let you run off to your busy, hectic day? And we did miss you in the studio, and we're looking forward to having you back in person next week. But thank you for joining us by phone, too.
No, absolutely. And it's just perfect timing because I have to leave at 3 o'clock to go to the next thing. I kind of pushed my tutoring off to 3:15. They were very, very flexible with me, which is wonderful. But just happy Halloween to everyone, and be safe, have fun, be safe. Take Uber or Lyft.
Good advice.
And don't forget to honor your ancestors, and like I said, use this as an opportunity to really manifest some things that you kind of think of it as a jump on like a New Year's resolution. Sort of like, what would you like to happen in the next year? Now that, this might be a better time to actually manifest than the new year. So, given the fact that the veil is so thin. So, those are my parting words for the lovely audience. Like I said, just be safe and happy Halloween.
Well, we're really happy that you came and spent a little time with us, and a happy Halloween to you as well, and to everyone out there. And with that, we will let you go, and good luck with your day. So take care, Kristen.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. I'll let you know how the drunk tarot card readings go.
There you go. Yeah, definitely, for sure. Well, good luck with everything.
Yeah, good luck with that. Thanks for joining us.
All right, I'll see you guys very soon.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
All right,
Bye-bye.
Kristen, good night. Wow, I'm so glad she could join us. It was really our first time doing a phone-in, so we love it, and we're glad it all worked out, and we would have missed not having Kristen here for sure. And yes, everyone, I hope you have a really good week ahead, and don't eat too much candy. That's probably one of the real dangers of Halloween is the candy.
Yes, I suspect that's a big danger of Halloween, as a matter of fact. So
yeah, the sugar.
The sugar is not a good thing, so stay away from the sugar for sure.
You can have a little bit, of course, as a kid, that's one of the great things about Halloween, at least it was when we were kids, all the candy that you would get.
Yes, and it's still a great thing, except for those of us who are diabetic. We have to stay away from some of that stuff, but it is fun. And Halloween, again, has always been one of our favorite holidays, and we look forward to it a lot. I think that the cool thing about Halloween, I always said, is when you decorate, you don't have to have good taste, which is I think, a good thing. So we have a lot of fun with it. We hope you guys all have a lot of fun with it, too. And next week, we'll be here live, and Adela is an amazing person. I think she's going to be a lot of fun to have on as our first guest, and we hope you guys can all join us for that. So I'll send you over to Krista for her final words of wisdom, and then we are off.
Well, thank you again for joining us tonight, and we really appreciate your support. So don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and we really look forward to putting on a lot more programs for you. I've enjoyed this particular topic myself, as the ancestors mean a lot to me as a Cancerian, and as I've gotten older, as I said, and I think that it's going to be a very special week for some reason. It feels like that to me. So really enjoy it however you like to, and thank you so much for staying with us and watching us, and have a great evening.